The 16th studio album from the Australian rock group Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds comes 3 years after their previous outing, which saw mass critical acclaim and was hailed as one of 2013's best records. This new project, entitled Skeleton Tree, is one that is surrounded by a severe amount of trepidation and fragile emotion, coming a year after the death of Nick's then 15-year-old son Arthur, who fell off a cliff face in Brighton to his untimely death. Before this tragedy took place, Cave was in the process of creating a new album, and after this event, many of the tracks ended up being changed, reflecting more on Cave's sadness and heartbreak in the aftermath of losing his son, and what results is one of the most emotionally devastating and draining albums to come out this year, and anyone who isn't touched by this project in the slightest is simply a monstrous creature lacking any sort of empathy and humanity in general. Thematically, this album deals very heavily in the themes of death, loss, and recovering from the pain that comes with such. This album essentially takes all of your emotions and smashes them into a million pieces. This album, after the first listen, leaves anyone that has a shred of humanity in them devastated at the complete bleak and desolate atmosphere this album creates, with pretty much every song bringing the listener to the brink before the final track brings a sense of affirmation that ends on an unexpected note of hope that caps off one of this year's best albums, more than worthy enough to be recognised as something that's truly special and takes its place as one of the most emotionally charged albums you'll ever hear. The album immediately lets the listener know what they're in for with the opening track Jesus Alone, where Cave draws comparison to the location of his son's death and that of a plane crash which occurred 1 month afterwards, 10 miles away from the cliffs where Arthur died, going on to wonder what the future held for his son if he was still alive. His death also brings into question his belief in God before ending the track with the poignant notion that his son has become a distant memory to his creator, referencing both himself and God, and the chorus sees him calling out to his son who will never respond to his father's calls. Girl in Amber sees Cave reminiscing on memories involving not only his son but his wife, and reminisces on the times that the three of them spent together, highlighting in the chorus that he'll never hear his son's voice ever again and the grief and desperation that has been brought upon him, ending heartbreakingly with the sentiment "Don't touch me," directed at those who are looking to provide comfort to Cave, yet he doesn't want any sort of physical contact at all due to his disposition. I Need You brings up his wife again, where he envisages this figure in red where he expresses his desire and need for this person, yet despite this person's presence, he's still mired in such a distraught state that their love cannot bring him out of his mentality, echoing the bleak notion of nothing really matters. Cave addresses his emotions further on the song Magneto, which sees him experiencing a plethora of emotions: hurt, confusion, rage, and his reaction to those who offer comfort, resulting in the guy lashing out. Despite recognizing these persons' good intentions, he's so racked with grief that he doesn't know how to handle his emotions and reacts in a way that comes the most natural to him. The penultimate track, Distant Sky, sees Cave and guest vocalist, Danish singer Else Torp, staring into the heavens at the stars above, comforted almost by the realization that the gods and dreams we have do not outlive us on the second verse, but ends on the line, "But they lied." Possibly these gods and dreams are meant to represent the children that some people have, and how a parent should never outlive their child and no one should ever bear witness to such. Only in Nick's case, this has turned out to not be true. And the album's final track ends the project simply perfectly, with Cave recognizing that the sense of loss and devastation is always going to be present, acknowledging that due to the love he had for his son, the pain is made all the more prominent. Yet despite being surrounded by nothing but silence, Cave attempts to reassure the listener that he'll carry on with life, accepts all of these notions, and finally concludes the song and the album on the striking line, "It's all right now." The remaining 2 tracks draws upon a heavy emphasis of pain and loss. Rings of Saturn paints the picture of our protagonist having wild intercourse, almost animalistic in its imagery, only for the lady in question to abandon our lead and move on to her next client, portraying this lady as a spider-like creature, a cold and clinical mistress lacking empathy, and moving on quickly to whoever requires her services next. But I do get this underlying notion of our lead being affected by a damaging event, and he seeks comfort, hoping to nullify his anguish and get away from his personal issues for a while. And finally, Anthrocene, which creates these luscious images of nature, and despite its beauty, there's this underlying recognition that humanity is in search for love, yet along the way, humanity has brought upon some destructive behaviours. Instrumentally, the album is very much drenched in the electronic and avant-garde genres and sprinkles in some rock elements along the way, creating an atmosphere that only adds to this album's morbid nature, but does include some truly inspiring and beautiful instrumentations that are borderline tearjerkers. Jesus Alone has this ethereal and wavy synth sound prominent throughout, with a buzzing, almost grinding synth tone in the background, along with hints of minor tone piano chords, a rich and heavy string arrangement, and a subtle rattling drum piece that comes off as militant in places. The synths on Rings of Saturn are absolutely beautiful, and with piano chords, what results is one of this album's best instrumentals that's capable of making the listener misty-eyed by the end. The somber combination of the sweet piano melody, synth strings, and tinkling sound effects on Girl in Amber are gorgeous. Magneto has this very patient feeling to it. The gentleness of the synth tones with the occasional appearance from this low humming bass line are very hypnotic. Anthrocene is one of this album's more erratic pieces. The drums have an almost unfocused nature, along with an appearance from a synth church organ, sliding synth tone, and very subtle, almost inaudible buzzing in the undercurrent. I Need You has this real angelic nature to it in the beginning, easily the most alternative rock song on this project. Distant Sky carried completely by a synth keyboard, tubular bells, and the occasional thud kick drum, which leaves you on the brink of tears before those strings in the final minute just opens the floodgates, and there's no stopping the outburst. And finally, the album's titular track, opting for a gospel-inspired theme with the church organ, strumming acoustic guitar, piano, and synth lines, along with the backing vocalists, caps off something that is truly special. So yeah, if you haven't figured it out by now, this album is pretty much the closest thing to perfect I've heard all year, and in comparison to everything that I've heard so far, nothing comes close to this album. The writing, the production, the lyrics, Nick Cave's vocals that are enriched with this pent-up emotion that feels like it was screaming to be heard for so long, the moments where he sounds as though he's on the verge of breaking down in tears himself, the inclusion of the backing vocalists, and the guest feature simply adds up to this being one of the best albums, not only of this year, but one of the best things I've ever heard. On par with Sun Kil Moon's Benji, an album where I experienced a similar rush of emotions whilst listening to it. After the first listen, I was in abject love with this project. On repeated listen, that love only intensified. As I said, this album is pretty much close to a perfect score, but there are a couple of minute moments that don't necessarily hit the mark for me, primarily on the track Anthrocene. I wasn't completely head over heels with the track's instrumental, but aside from that, the chances of anything coming along and topping this one, I'll be pretty fucking amazed if that were to happen. Overall, I score this album a 95 out of 100.